In a way, this exchange has been about two different interpretations of the ultimate meaning of the tragedy and of the sacrifice that we've witnessed, that came with the earthquake and the tsunami and the nuclear disaster. It raised some of the most fundamental human questions about the meaning of sacrifice, about what matters. Is saving lives what matters? Surely it matters a great deal. Is the nobility of sacrifice a principle that is even higher than life itself? We heard a powerful disagreement about these questions of sacrifice and rescue and the ultimate meaning of heroic acts. And what this suggests to me, we heard applause in response to both arguments. Both arguments were eloquent in their own way. And what this suggests is how responding to the challenges posed by this disaster, this tragedy, takes us to some of the most fundamental questions, philosophical questions, but also spiritual questions. Not only philosophical and spiritual questions, but also political questions. Questions about democracy and about what matters in civic life. We've heard in the discussion so far worries expressed by some that the challenge of the Reconstruction has led to disagreement, to arguments, to discord within families and within communities. Earlier today, I visited Uriagi, and I saw the devastation. And when I was there, I learned about some of the debates and disagreements that are going on, disagreements that have slowed down the pace of Reconstruction. For example, they're debating whether to rebuild the communities right by the sea that were destroyed, or whether to have mass relocation. And people disagree. Sometimes between generations they disagree about where to rebuild and about whether to create large hills of soil to elevate the homes and rebuild them there. There are debates about whether to build a high seawall to reduce the threat of a future tsunami, or whether building that high seawall would deprive the residents not only of their view of the sea, but of their connection to the sea, their way of life. There's disagreement about these questions. And until those disagreements are resolved, it seems, the Reconstruction can't go forward. Now, this raises a question about agreement and disagreement, about the need for consensus as against the need for decisive action. Everyone recognizes the value of achieving consensus when deciding important questions. And yet at the same time, almost everyone is frustrated by the slow pace of the Reconstruction. This is what I heard and learned when I went to Uriagi. So here's the question I would like to put to you, the final question on which we'll vote. Which of these views about consensus and Reconstruction comes closest to your own? Do you think that the Reconstruction should be based on consensus, even if this takes time? Or do you think that the Reconstruction should move ahead more quickly, even without consensus, if necessary? So, raise the red card if you believe that Reconstruction should be based on consensus, even if this takes time, and raise the white card if you think that the Reconstruction should move ahead more quickly, even without consensus if necessary. Raise the white card if you hold that view. We have another division, another disagreement, pretty evenly divided. Maybe I see a few more white signs, which means consensus, then red signs, which mean moving ahead more quickly. Well, thank you for that. Did I get it wrong? All right, I got it wrong. All right, let me do that again. Thanks to the wonders of television, we can remove my mistakes. I wish that were true in the rest of my life. All right. Which of these statements comes closest to your view? Reconstruction should be based on consensus, even if it takes time. Raise the white card if you think that. Or, the Reconstruction should move faster, even without consensus if necessary. Raise the red card. You want me to say it again? All right. Let's see. Raise the cards up. Reconstruction should be based on consensus, even if it takes time. Raise the white card. And keep those cards up. And if you think it should move faster, even without consensus, raise the red card. Most people want it to move faster, even if it means without consensus. All right, let me hear from someone first who raised the red card, who believes that the Reconstruction should move faster, even without consensus, that there has to be quicker action, that there has to be decisive action, that there has to be stronger leadership, and that it's unrealistic to expect consensus on everything. Yes, the woman in yes.
本当に想定外のことがたくさん起こっているので、正解が何かっていうのはわからないと思うんです。だから前に進むしかないと思うので、とにかく決めてアクションを起こしてやってみて間違ったらまた変えるっていうその間違えることを恐れないでとにかく前に進むことの方が重要なんじゃないかと思ったのでディサイシブの方にしました。
More decisive action, move more quickly, don't wait for consensus. Who disagrees? Who believes that consensus should take priority? Yes, in the second row. Stand up. Second row in the balcony. We'll get you a microphone.
東北大学経済学部の小笠原玲と申します。私は全員時間かかっても全員の合意が必要だと考えています。なぜなら、強いリーダーシップがあって早く復興を進める多数決でもいいから、切り捨てる意見も出るという意見があったんですけども、多分その結果生じたのが今回の原発事故だったり過去の原発推進だったと思うので、その同じ鉄を踏まないためにも みんなが考えて時間かかってもいいから政策なり復興案を考えてくるのがいいと思ってます。
And what about the argument you just heard that says we may never move the Reconstruction forward if we wait for consensus? Remember how difficult it was to get agreement about where to locate even preliminary sites for the contaminated soil. What do you say to that argument?
仮置き場も多分できるだけ早くという決めなきゃいけないというのもあるんですけど、その多分決め方にもいろいろ選択肢があると思うんです。福島原発、例えば今回は原発の事故で例を取りますけれども、福島原発から電力を供給されている例えば同じ関東地方の県にも一律で分け与えるという選択肢もあるので、早く全てが早くやるというのが一律で正しいというわけではなくて、熟慮の上でちょっと強制的な面もあるのがいいのではないかと思います。ちょっと質問の意図に沿えているのかどうかわからないんですけども。
The principle should be we should move with consensus. We need to take time to deliberate. We need to bring the entire community along together. That's the argument for trying to achieve consensus. All right, let's hear from someone who disagrees, someone who feels that more decisive action is necessary. All right, more decisive action. Who has an answer? Yes. Stand up and speak directly. What's your name again? Tell me your name again.
桜田文彦と。
Okay, speak directly to Fumiko. What's your name?
はい、桜田文彦と申します。宮城県の北部の。
Fumiko. And what's your name?
小笠原レイと申します。
Okay, speak directly to Ray and tell him why you disagree with what he's just said about waiting for consensus. Why do you see if you can persuade him to move faster, decisive action? Speak to him.
まずその地域住民全員の合意が得られるかどうかというのは、まず合意が得られた方がいいとちょっと考えがちだと思うんですけれども、先ほどいろいろな方の意見にも出たように、地域住民の中あるいは家族の中でさえいろんな意見があってコンセンサスを得るっていうのは容易ではないことだと思います。で一方でコンセンサスを得ることができれば、それに向けて地域住民なり、県民国民一体となってドイツの政策を進めていけるので一見いいようにも思えるんですけれども、一方で必ずしもそのコンセンサスを得た結果だけが最良のものだとは限らないと僕は思います。その中でいろいろな多様な意見がある中で、多数派の意見を単純に最良のものとして取り扱うのではなくて、いろいろある意見を折衷案として、例えば多数派の意見も取り入れるけれども少数派の意見もきちんと汲み取った形でいろいろな人の意見を統合して、それらを調和させるような形で、単純に全ての人の意見が合うのを待つのではなくて、いろいろな人の意見をきちんと取り入れて、そういう形を全体に生かしていくという方向性が必要なのではないかと僕は思っています。
And what would you say?
その折衷案ということでいろんな人の意見を取り入れるというのもあるんですけども、そうなった時に万が一それでできた案でその責任の所在を追及するとしたらどういう責任の追及の仕方になるのかなというのは疑問を感じました。やっぱりその折衷案ということはどっかには採用される案もあって切り捨てられる案もあるので、その採用された案で反対した人っていうのは責任を絶対負わなくてもいいのか、それでも責任を負わなきゃいけないのかっていう責任の分配という変な言い方ですけど、そういう問題も出てくるのではないかなと思いました。
今のその責任の所在ということでいうと、まずその全体のコンセンサスを得た場合というのはもちろんその一人一人が一つの案に対して合意しているわけですので、何か問題が生じた場合っていうのはその 共同体すべての人に同様に責任が割り振ることができるけれども、折衷案だとその元の意見の違いによってその責任の所在というのがどういうふうになるかっていうことだと思うんですけれども、もちろんその折衷案として例えばいろいろな意見を組み合わせた中で、例えばいろいろな意見を組み合わせた中の一つが問題を起こしたということであれば、その中のその意見を主張した人だけが責任を問われるというのではなくて、やはり全体の責任として全体折衷案としてその全体の共同体全体が責任を負わなければいけないと考えています。
Yes? Okay, here, stand up, we'll get you a microphone.
先ほどマイケル・サンデルさんが閖上に行ってこられたということをお聞きしましたが、テレビでやってましたがね、閖上地区でたとえねその津波に襲われたことがあったとしても、私はここに残るっていうね言い合ってる人がいたんですよ。それでね結局高台にねまとまっていけないっていうね、そういうことを私はねテレビで見てますよ。そうするとね、小川さんがね言ってるようなね、全員の合意を待つなんてことはね、絵に描いた餅ですよ。そんなのは無理ですよ。やっぱりね、ある程度ねみんなで論議はしなくちゃいけないと思うんですよ。だけどね、やっぱりいろんな意見が出てくるんですからね、この土地は離れたくないとかね、いるんですよ、そういう人が。でね、それでね結局ね100年間でね、明治昭和今度の東日本大震災3回、110何年のうちに3回津波が来てるんですよ。だからね、一番大切なことはもう津波で絶対人命を失わないということをね、最大の目標にしてね決めないとね、全員の合意なんか待ってたらね何もできませんよ。
Is there anyone who would like to give one last defense of consensus, even having heard the arguments from those who say the Reconstruction needs to move forward faster? Why is consensus important? Why is it an important value, do you think, those of you who do, even though many people are dissatisfied with the pace of the Reconstruction? Who has an answer to that question? Yes, toward the back, in the black shirt.
現在、宮城県の北部にある南三陸町というところで、被災者支援をしております。ご存知の通り、南三陸町というところはほとんど町が壊滅している状態です。ということは、復興ということはイコール新しい町を作るということだと思っております。そういうふうに考えたときに、今やっている議論というのはあまりにも短すぎるというふうに思っています。多くの町民は自分の町は自分で作りたいと言って一生懸命に議論をしています。当然ながらいろいろ意見の差はあります。でも彼らは全員すべて合意をするというよりも、コンセンサスというのは、私は彼らの意見とか考え方を見ていると、合意という言葉よりは納得という言葉がなんか合っているような気がします。彼らは議論をしながらその自分の気持ちを整理し納得するのを待っているのだと思います。そういう時間を彼らに与える必要は私はあるような気がしています。
So this is a very powerful suggestion. And the distinction, you've made an important distinction between consensus, which suggests everybody agreeing, and understanding, which suggests listening to everyone, understanding their points of view, recognizing that not every point of view can prevail, and yet appreciating that to build a community or to rebuild a community requires not that everyone agree, but that everyone's voice is heard and everyone's perspective is considered. I want to thank all of you who have participated in this discussion about consensus versus the need for more decisive action to move forward with the Reconstruction. And what I've learned from this discussion, what I've heard in the debate between those who want to move ahead more quickly and those who want to move deliberately to achieve consensus, is something that really goes to the heart of what political life and community life are about. When we go about our ordinary lives, when there is no disaster confronting us, it may sometimes seem that we can find consensus and we should not argue too vigorously with one another. But what we've been talking about here today is the task of rebuilding communities. And that raises big questions, fundamental questions, about how we want to live together. We want to live by the sea, some say, and others say, but history has shown us that there are dangers. Some want to build a high seawall to protect against future tsunamis, and others say that cuts us off from the sea and from our way of life. Some people say, let's have mass relocation for the sake of safety, and others say, no, that would deprive us of places that carry great meaning for our lives. These are not easy questions. They're not questions on which we can expect everyone to agree. But they are questions on which we need to find shared understandings. Big questions about which we need to argue, but argue with respect, listen to one another, and learn from one another. And that's really what we've been trying to do here today. I would like to call again on Mrs. Sakano. Mrs. Sakano, would you stand up again, please? Mrs. Sakano said in her essay, in her statement of purpose, just stand up so we can see you. And we'll get you a microphone. You said, the people of Tohoku are shy, and the idea of gathering 1,000 people from Tohoku in one place to debate questions about the Reconstruction, to argue with one another, you said, that won't work, or it might not work. Having heard the discussion here tonight, what do you think now, Mrs. Sakano?
まず私はもうここに来る前に誰ももう何も諦めてもう発言したってしょうがないやっていう気持ちで来た人もたくさんいるかなと思ってたんですけど、いろんな立場の方の正直な意見を生で聞くことができて、諦めないでどんなふうに進んでいくのかっていうのは本当にわからないんですけど、諦めないで自分の意見をはっきり言うっていうことがまず大切なことだなっていうふうに思いました。なので、この気持ちを忘れないで今後も進んでいけたらいいなというふうに思います。以上です。
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. I mentioned that earlier today I visited Yuriagi, and I was taken around by a 70-year-old man, Mr. Kosai, who had lost his home. He took me to the place where his home once stood, and it was flat, it was level, and weeds were growing there. And the entire neighborhood was devastated, where had been a flourishing neighborhood by the sea, a community, was flat and empty except for a few foundation walls that could still be seen. And he told me he had lived in that place. I asked him for how long. He said for all 70 years of his life, he had lived there. And now he didn't know what the future would bring. He took me to the junior high school in Yuriagi, and he told me how people fled the tsunami and sought refuge on the roof of the junior high school. And in the front of the junior high, there's a memorial to the 14 students from that junior high school who were lost. And then we went to a hilltop shrine, or what had been a shrine. Little was left of it, but the hill was still there. And he explained to me that the waves had come 6 meters, even above 6 meters, and had washed away that shrine on the hill. And from that hill, which is almost empty now, we could look out on the sea. And I asked him what he thought now when he looked upon the sea. And he said he didn't look upon the sea even now, even given his experience, with fear, but with love, because he still had gratitude for this sea by which he had lived his life and which was the source of so much of his life and that of the community. And he told me about the disagreements. He didn't know what the Reconstruction would be. He didn't know if his home and that of those of his neighbors would be rebuilt in that place. He didn't know whether those high mounds that are being considered to elevate homes, he didn't know if that was realistic or not. But he did have a sense of perseverance, a certain faith in the future, even though he admitted he didn't know what that future could be. We've had a series of debates here this evening, discussions, not about hypothetical philosophical questions, but about the philosophy of everyday life. I said when we began that I was not here to bring answers to these questions. I wish I had the answers. I don't. I came to listen and to learn, and what I learned gives me great hope, because what I learned is that here together 1,000 people from Tohoku can gather to discuss and debate with strong views, conflicting views, red signs and white signs on some of the biggest questions you face, and yet have those debates with decency and civility and mutual respect. And that's a precious thing. We've heard discussion about the disagreements that the Reconstruction has brought, disagreements over how to rebuild communities, disagreements within families about whether to evacuate. And I sense a certain uneasiness, maybe a certain ambivalence about whether those disagreements are destructive or whether maybe they are productive of something good, something hopeful. One of the statements that those of you wrote before you came that moved me especially was from a company worker, a 30-year-old company worker, Mr. Abe from Miyagi. And he wrote this: if there had not been the earthquake, people wouldn't be engaged in arguments as they are today. The Reconstruction plan has a direct impact on our lives. So we find ourselves engaged in discussions with people with whom, before the earthquake, we had very little to discuss. That is not a beautiful scene, Mr. Abe said. People who are unaccustomed to argument clash with one another seriously, and yet each of them cannot do anything alone. And so in one way, these disagreements deepens their broken heart, a heart already broken by the earthquake. And yet, Mr. Abe said, sometimes these disagreements deepen human relationships and make people understand one another. By participating in this lecture, Mr. Abe said, I would like to be one of those citizens who think about the Reconstruction deeply. I think the difference that was raised earlier between everybody agreeing, which is impossible, and everyone working to understand one another, that's an important difference. What I've been so moved by tonight, what I've been moved by in this discussion is, despite our disagreements, despite different views about how to rebuild lives and how to rebuild communities, disagreements reaching fundamental philosophical and spiritual questions, despite those disagreements, there is a spirit of mutual respect, a determination to have these disagreements openly, to try to reason with one another, to try to seek an understanding, a shared understanding based on mutual respect. And if that carries over into the months and years that this reconstruction will require, then from this tragedy, from this disaster, may come something very hopeful, something that, as Mr. Abe suggests, may deepen human relationships and our lives with one another. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.